Really a fantastic topic for us to be talking about on the round table. Menopause and equality, diversity. There you are. Look, I'm tongue-tied already. It must be the time of the evening. Diversity and inclusion in menopause. And what does that mean? What does it look like? Are we just looking at workplace inclusion, or are we looking at the community in general and, of course, our lives at home? It's a broad subject for us to cover. We'll get through it in good time, I'm sure, but I think that you'll gain some really great insights from our guest speakers this evening. And when we talk about menopause, we often talk about it through everybody's experience being exactly the same way. And of course, we know that it's not. Because it varies through race, culture, sexuality, gender identity, and access to healthcare can be really profoundly different for everyone's experience. So equality is recognizing that those differences exist, and that's what we're going to be talking about this evening. Inclusion is doing something about that, and including everybody. When I launched Menopause Experts Group, do you know it took nearly 2 years for us to welcome on board our first menopause champion, who was a woman of colour. And that wasn't really because we'd done anything wrong. It was mostly because, although we were actively encouraging representation for women of colour, at that particular time, the media conversation was heavily aimed at middle class, middle England white women. And Rona will remember, it really wound me up. I got really irritated by this, as if it's only white women who experience menopause, which is why I really wanted this conversation to be brought around the table. And of course, then within 2 years, we did see a woman of colour, thankfully, and ever since, it's been something that we've been proactively encouraging, and we have now fantastic representation across our champion network. But when the media is overwhelming with this presence that doesn't include everybody, then people can't relate to it. If they don't see people that look like them, they can't relate to it. And so those things have to change. So perhaps it's more likely that we're going to see more engagement from those from other cultures and communities and women of colour and the LGBTQ plus community, which we're going to be talking about this evening as well, when we've got more representation talking about menopause. It seems to make sense. And as soon as we started, celebrating that, then we saw more champions joining us. You have to bear with me because I've got some notes, because I am menopausal after all, and if I don't write it all down, then I'm clearly going to forget to talk about it. I think it proves something really important, the work that we've been doing now for 6 years, and that representation really matters, and just covering the experiences for everybody. I just want to go through a few stats, which some are quite alarming. Some you may have heard before, others you won't have. And I'm a white woman, okay, so some of these stats are really quite shocking. They're not stats that I've not read before, but I still find them really inexcusable. So according to a US study of the women's health across the nation, this is in America, Black women reach menopause around, they're saying 8.5 months. Now, a few years ago, they were saying that it could be years before a white woman would experience menopause. Now they've fine-tuned this, I suppose, through research, and they're saying that on average, it's about 8.5 months sooner than a white woman on average would experience perimenopause leading into menopause. They're also more likely to experience severe hot flushes, night sweats, poor sleep, low mood, of course, which we know about, and their symptoms may last for significantly longer, often more than 10 years. A 2025 US survey of African American women found that 94% experienced night sweats. 94%. That's really high. 93% experienced hot flushes, and 81% said that their symptoms had lasted for at least 9 years. Okay, that's a long time. Black women are also more likely to experience heavier bleeding during perimenopause. So more flooding, as some of us may have experienced, which is just an awful thing to experience. And this isn't talked about enough. And in fact, I really, really want to hold a round table on that subject of our changes in periods as we're going through perimenopause. As some of you who know me, you know, my perimenopause, I'm still actually, by the book, I'm still perimenopausal at 57, having started in my very early 40s. You know, we know this is a long period of time, pardon the pun. Yet despite all this, Black women are far less likely to receive support, including HRT, for example, even in the UK. And the UK, recent research from UCL, which is a university college in London, found that Black women are often underinformed, undersupported and dismissed during menopause, with many saying healthcare professionals did not take their symptoms seriously. It staggers me, but of course it will be no surprise to a couple of our speakers this evening. Research in England also found that Black African women were about 80% less likely to receive hormone replacement therapy than white women, 80% more likely to not receive HRT than a white woman. According to Wellbeing of Women, only 5.2% of Black women aged between 45 and 55 are using HRT. Now, I'm going to give you this stat just so that it sinks in. There's 23.3% white women currently on HRT in England. So that's versus just over 5% of Black women. There's a correlation there, isn't there, between, you know, those consultations with GPs that are perhaps not taking those symptoms seriously. And I want to know why. And this is why we've got to have these types of conversations. Why is this happening? For South Asian women, the experience can be different again. So research from the British Menopause Society suggests that South Asian women may experience fewer hot flushes, but more body aches and pains, palpitations, heart palpitations, anxiety, and urinary tract infections. Because these symptoms don't fit the typical picture of menopause, they can sometimes be misdiagnosed and, again, overlooked. Isn't that just outrageous? One thing that many people don't know is that there can still be an unconscious stereotype that Black women are somehow stronger or more able to cope. Sort of renders me speechless, really. Researchers believe that this can mean that pain, poor sleep, anxiety, and emotional distress are minimized or often dismissed. It's just a bizarre outlook. And this is exactly why equality, particularly in healthcare, let alone every other part of our lives, but particularly in healthcare, it really, really matters, because treating everybody the same doesn't always mean, you know, treating everybody fairly. The same is true for the LGBTQ plus community. One of the biggest issues facing that community is actually invisibility. It's almost as if they really just don't exist. Research shows that many menopause services still assume that everybody is heterosexual, cisgender, and in a traditional relationship. So many lesbian and bisexual women say that mainstream menopause information does not feel relevant to them because it assumes that they have a male partner or focus mainly on fertility rather than identity, well-being and relationships. So many from the LGBTQ plus community do not disclose their sexuality or gender identity to healthcare professionals because they fear judgment. And this might be down to previous negative experiences, so there'll be a fear element there. And that can mean that they delay the help, support, or any treatments that would be appropriate for their symptom management. Research also suggests that lesbian women may experience more severe hot flushes and night sweats than heterosexual women, whilst bisexual women report higher levels of anxiety and depression during menopause. Trans and non-binary people may also experience menopause, yet they're almost entirely absent from mainstream campaigns, from TV advertising, from education, from other services, workplace policies. Some trans men report not feeling comfortable attending services described as women's menopause clinics. Now, how often do we see that? A menopause clinic for women, women's menopause clinics. One very simple but important example is that many workplace menopause policies still begin with the phrase women over 45. And I see this all the time, and we're always saying to champions, you know, please don't be age specific and don't be gender specific. It's really interesting, isn't it? And it's something that irritates me every time I see this over 45, as if nobody experiences menopause unless they're over 45, which we know is ridiculous. The wording immediately excludes Black women who may experience menopause earlier, younger people that are experiencing premature menopause. This could be medical or clinical menopause, trans men, non-binary people, and anyone who doesn't identify with that language. And perhaps that's where true inclusion begins, not with assuming that one approach fits all, but by being willing to listen and to learn and sometimes rethink the language that we use. And of course, that builds more tolerance and understanding, and then we can all genuinely start to support each other. We know there's a backlash going on around the world at the moment about being woke, isn't there? And we know what's happening in America is pushing back on that diversity and inclusion. And I really hope that all of the work and the fine work that people have been doing for decades trying to include everybody doesn't shatter to pieces. I think we are seeing it in some shape or form. So before we then begin our discussion this evening, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our guest speakers. Two of them are already members of our Menopause Pro Roundtable, and the third, a good friend of mine, Margot Slattery, who's also a member of our advisory board here at Menopause Experts Group. So welcome to all three of you. It's really lovely to have your company. Apologies from Kathy, she can't join us this evening. She's got a family affair that she needs to attend to, and I just really want to send our condolences as well to another member of our pro team who's just experienced a bereavement this week. Lorraine, our thoughts are with you. So I'm thrilled to have Beverley and Marva and Margot, who are going to be sharing their insights. They've had some questions so that they can really prepare for this evening, and so that we don't run over on time, but that we get across the points that are really, really vital for us. So if I can go firstly then to Beverley. Good evening, Beverley. It's really lovely to see you. I'm going to let you have a bit of time just to introduce yourself so that everyone who's listening and watching can understand who you are, what you actually do, and the part that you're playing in terms of this evening's conversation, and then we can get stuck into some of the questions that I've got for you.
Thank you, Dee. Good afternoon, good evening. Delighted to have been invited. Delighted to be a presenter as well. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Beverley Powell. I'm the author and founder of Rest, Rise and Reclaim. My work has a focus on Black and brown women predominantly, and I also act as an enabler to enable them to self-advocate. I've also been a life coach, or still am, for over 20 years, and over 25 years working in the EDI space, working in the police service, the prison service, and currently in the NHS England with a strategic overview on policy and programmes. So I also mentor women, Black, brown, and white women, all women across the board, in terms of self-advocacy. But as mentioned, my focus is on Black and brown women, their lived experience, and the cross-cutting themes across there in terms of critical race theory, the work by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, taking an intersectional lens. So lots of the things you've just introduced there has those cross-cutting themes, which I introduce when I'm supporting our women, not largely in the system, but also I work in the community as well.
Brilliant. Oh, it's super to have you. And of course, so many of us are at that age where we have decades of lived experience behind us. And of course, because you've worked across so many sectors, and you would have gleaned so much information and experience, and a lot of that will be so valuable to you personally and in your career, but also is so vital that you can share your insights and thoughts, especially around tables like ours. So looking back over your career, then, Beverley, what did you notice about how menopause was discussed or not discussed for women of colour?
I think, to my mind, over the years, I would say that I've observed that women of colour are largely absent from mainstream discourse. The old narratives, again, as you said in your introduction, being invisible or being aggressive, and therefore, in my professional experience, what I've seen is largely Black and brown women take themselves out of the limelight. So I'm always encouraging, and people who know me will know that I encourage people to shine their light. Don't stay in the shade, shine your light, because we have been largely absent from mainstream discourse. So there is a stigma, and I think there's a systemic invisibility which is around there, and historically those narratives as well. So we know that historically we could go right back to colonialism and how it's been built into the fabric of systems. Therefore, when we look at policies, I don't often see myself in there, or it isn't specific, or sometimes it's often said that it's implied. So in policy, that's within systems, it's implied. So in the community, when I'm working in the community, there's often a fear of knowing what to ask when they are interfacing with healthcare providers and others, and just going about their normal business. So there's an intersection there on race, culture, and lived experience. And as a result, many women of colour have navigated menopause without language, representation, or indeed culturally relevant support.
Yeah, so it's why sort of trying to find out why it's taking so long, because I mean, really, I have seen it take a long time for this conversation to be had, and to see more and more Black women out there talking about menopause, and it's still a relatively recent, and still not enough. It's a relatively recent occurrence. Why do you think? I mean, I'm guessing that politics play a role, culture plays a role, but why do you think it's taking much longer? You think there is just this sort of fear of stepping forward, or Why do you think it's taken so long?
There are pockets of good work across the country that I see, certainly in the UK. So my work is primarily based in the UK and supporting our Black and Brown colleagues and friends. But I would say that cultural expectations, and if we look at who are at board level, that's why I'm delighted that I'm part of this, because it's important who is around the table, who is advocating for our Black and Brown women in this sense. And if we look at the research by Professor Roger Klein many years ago, he did a report and it was called Snowy White Peaks. I still refer to that now because when we look at the board or the higher echelons, as we may call it, the higher you go, the whiter the peaks are. It's snowy white, as he would say. So there are not a lot of women like myself. Hence, it's slower to have that level of influence and be around that table. So I know there was a famous Black woman in America. She's no longer with us, but she did say, if you aren't round the table, there's no seat, you bring your own chair, which is why I wanted to join this group, this movement, and develop Rest, Rise and Reclaim. So it's about us all advocating and taking up the call and recognizing the data and the disparity, who is around the table, who's at the board. And I think that's a challenge, why it's so slow. It is getting there, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Are you seeing particular challenges and expectations across various communities? Do you see a difference?
Yes, I would, in conversations with women in the communities that I engage with, there is a thing we recognize it as the imposter syndrome. I have particular issues around the imposter syndrome, who developed it, and the focus. However, that is a term that is often used around with Black and Brown women. To me, they feel like an imposter. They feel like they may be creating too much trouble to be able to advocate, and therefore, I don't like to use the term, but may dumb themselves down and not say anything. So in the community, there are lots of issues on a one-to-one when I have those conversations, but the interface, the message isn't being heard or seen. And that's why it's so important to be involved in coaching or mentoring. If you have those skills, I would encourage anybody to be out there and support those. I don't like to use the term minority. I certainly, as a Black woman, I am part of the global majority. So it's about encouraging the global majority for the purpose of this discussion, our Black and Brown sisters.
And I suppose accessibility is key too, because if you are I'm guessing that depending on your profession, you know, where you work, what your career is, that your accessibility to funds, to finance, all of those things will have a bearing, right? Because if you wanted to step into the menopause conversation, you'd have to, one, have the confidence to, and two, be able to access those circles, of people who are actually like you talking about it. You know, how would they find you? How would everybody find you? I think that accessibility is clearly has a role to play there for people to be able to access services and support and guidance from their peers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is this is a powerful discussion that we're having here. And I think it's much needed. And this is why for many years, way back from being part of the police service and bringing about one of the first Black and Asian Police Association staff network after the murder of Stephen Lawrence, we saw the importance of networking, engaging, formulating groups. And I'm a big fan of networks, which is why in the community I'm part of or a member of, different communities, and there is something about mobilizing, being part of that, engaging. If I don't know something, somebody else will know something. And it's a key enabler. So I would encourage anybody, if you need to get to know a little bit more, doesn't always have to cost money. Find out, where are your community groups? Where are your networks? Over the years, when I think about, certainly in the UK, the Black and brown women who have mobilised for better pay, employment rights, and bringing about some powerful change in legislation, it has been through mobilising. And so networks in the community play a powerful and pivotal role, and certainly in terms of health, menopause, I think it is absolutely key.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree. So what's your take on this stereotype of strong black women, as in you can cope with menopause, you can cope with anything, you don't need any support, you don't need any healthcare, you can just do it. I mean, where has that come from? And it's quite, when I read this, it was quite a surprise to me because it's not something that I would typically think about in terms of a stereotype. It's quite alien to me. So where do you feel that has come from? If the healthcare system is ignoring this, then clearly it needs addressing, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and I have been privileged enough, certainly, to be working with NHS England and the Race Health Observatory, where we have worked together and collaborated in the development of decolonising the education system. So again, I'm going back to the system and how people are educated. It's only recently that our healthcare providers are using black and brown dummies when it's part of the clinical education. So historically, I would suggest it's come from way back from colonialism. Black women don't feel any pain. Allegedly, we have thicker skin. When people are taking bloods, people are fearful of taking bloods because of our veins, and all sorts of old tropes and old stories. And we only have to look at the maternity reports and the outcomes, and we know the higher incidence statistically. So we know the data on that. And I think there's a whole lot of things that have permeated into the system and impacted, and therefore a lot of our educators, and even in outside of the healthcare, in other systems of education, there are things that are within the system that impact on black and brown women. For the purpose of this discussion, I would certainly suggest and advocate, as I've mentioned, the example with NHS England working with the Race Health Observatory, decolonising the education system and doing some deep research and developing lots of useful tools as key enablers is a starting point. It's a long way. We have a long way to go. But that is an example that I can share that I have actually been involved in. If we take it back 20 years back, the Macpherson report and the recommendations that came out for all of the 43 police forces, there were 40, it was 43 plus, if not more, recommendations. There had to be changes because they talked about institutional racism. And at that point, whilst I was working in the police service, a lot of the rank and file didn't understand the term institutional racism and took that quite personally. And again, working in the prison service, a major report came out after the murder, the untimely murder of the young Muslim teenager Zaid Mubarak. I was appointed then into the prison service, and again to drive through those recommendations. And we looked at risk assessments. Yes, I'm talking about two men here who lost their lives, or two young boys, but back to policy, back to systems, and back to how policies are written, enacted, and who is shaping those policies. So there's got to be something, Dee, for me. Many organisations and away from organisations, other parts of the wider system can largely be performative, like Black Lives Matter, and they have the logo or the lanyard. But I am big on moving from performative to action. It's very easy to have the lanyard and the logo and be performative, but moving to action is absolutely critical in moving this agenda forward, in shining a light and encouraging and enabling our Black and Brown sisters with their health.
Do you think that there's an element, just stepping away from healthcare for a minute, but going back into the workplace, do you think there's an element of, because as you say, there's an underrepresentation of Black and brown women that are at board level. We know that. There's an underrepresentation of women at board level, let alone Black and brown women at board level. That has to change. And we're the only ones, between us all, we're the only ones that can add to that change. But do you think there's a fear element, therefore? Because if at board level you've got this dominant white face, let's say, do you think there are elements of fear? What I'm trying to say is the fear of getting it wrong, the fear of litigation, the fear of saying the wrong thing. I think as we step into the woke movement, right? So therefore we're all using pronouns, and everything is shifting, and we've seen a shift, haven't we, over our lifetime? We've seen a huge shift over the last 30 years. So with diversity and inclusion, I think from a behavioural standpoint, I think that a lot of the decisions that are made at board level can be impacted by sheer fear, and
Yes.
I think that filters down. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Certainly, as an ED&I practitioner of over 25 years, I have seen this, I have heard this, where there is a fear and people are fearful if they are managing people or leading on services. There is a fear to call things out for fear of losing their job or a fear of getting it wrong and saying the wrong thing. And my response has always been to go in with curiosity, to go in with authenticity, to go in with honesty and just say, I would suggest, say, look, I may get this wrong. I am curious about this. I am learning. Help me. Where do I need to do the work? So not for the Black or the brown person to do the labor, but just for us or somebody who is unsure, who is fearful, to say, look, I'm frightened of getting this wrong, so please bear with me, and go in with that approach, then say nothing. The danger and the risk is if we don't have these open and honest conversations, then there's going to be a larger impact. So I am encouraging people to go in with curiosity and open heart, and let's open up and have those discussions. And I think certainly through our work, we are sharing, and that is a key enabler. But I think we've just got to go in with curiosity, because there's a bigger impact if we don't do that.
Yeah, just vocalize everything across work colleagues, families, communities, faith groups, you name it. Just keep talking. I think we've just got to keep talking rather than shouting, because I think aggression can only get you so far. Actually, the power of influence and empathy gets you further, I think. And so, yeah, we've really just got to keep talking, haven't we? And that's why these round tables are just so important, because we're all going to learn so much from each other. Um, if you could change one thing, let's say you could change one thing to improve the menopause experience then for underrepresented communities, and certainly we're talking here about women going through menopause. What would you change, Beverley?
I
Difficult, I
would.
know.
Yeah. And where do we start? Um, I would encourage people to do the work and undertake their own research, have those conversations. Don't look towards the black or brown person as the font of all knowledge. They're trying to navigate the systems in their own way. But I would ask questions, be curious, go in with a lens away from your own lens and ask those questions. Why is there no representation here or no image or whatever? And start to drill down and ask. Let's start to ask ourselves those questions. And I have to say, sometimes when we have that approach, and you're quite right, there's no, if we speak in a calm manner, but my work also includes taking a trauma-informed approach. And it's being aware of the years of trauma and experiences that some of our Black and Brown colleagues may have experienced. So there may be instances where it may be unexpected how somebody may respond. But I would again encourage people to understand and take a trauma-informed approach, make spaces psychologically safe, and understanding that and understanding those approaches, I think would be a starter for 10. It's a lot, but I think the deep and meaningful work and outcomes, people feel safe, and we take a trauma-informed approach, I think we will get more out from there and go in with curiosity. I hope I've responded to that well. I feel like I may have gone slightly off a tangent, but there's so much involved in that. But
Yeah.
that would be my starting point, Dee.
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. I know. Thank you so much, Beverley. We're going to come back to you a little bit later just for a final word once we've listened to our other guest speakers. And now I'm going to move across to Marva, who I've known Marva now for a couple of years. Marva is also one of our Menopause Pro roundtablers, if I can call her that. Marva, it's lovely to have you this evening. And
Hi, nice to have you.
yeah, really nice. And just so people who don't know you, if you can introduce yourself, because I know you're kind of multifaceted, but talk about your work across the menopause field, but also, you know, what your day job is, because I know that, well, I call you a mad professor of skincare. That's how I describe you. I think it's rather wonderful, the products that you produce, but perhaps you can just give people a bit of an insight as to who
Okay,
you
all
are.
right. My name's Marva Williams. I'm a menopause coach and counsellor, and I develop products for peri and postmenopausal women. I'm very symptom based. I like to look at a symptom and work out how to knock that symptom. So that's what I do, which is probably why Dee thinks I'm a mad professor. But you know, my day job is I've got a company called Shush, Menopause Wellness. And really, it's advocating for women. It's working with women, advocating women. I do a lot of work within the corporate environment, but my main thing is that women should have a voice, because so many women feel they don't have a voice. So that's really my passion, to making sure that women have the voice in this sector. They're taken seriously. And, you know, when we say we've got an issue, that we're actually listened to, and it's not just listened to, we are heard as well.
Now, I know that you had a very challenging health experience back a few years ago, which could have killed you. I know
Yeah.
you probably felt as if you were dying, certainly. Give us a little bit of an insight into that, because that was during perimenopause and
Yeah, that was during my
misdiagnosis.
perimenopause. I'm going to just take you a couple of years before that, because it really informs why I'm so passionate about advocating for women. I was going to my doctor for a few years saying, I'm not feeling well. I couldn't explain what was going on with me. I knew I had fibroids, but I was being dismissed. I was given different treatments. I was told I was depressed, which I didn't think I was depressed. But I never knew actually what it was. And then it comes to June 2019. I went to the doctor's surgery, not for myself, to pick up a prescription for my mum. I collapsed in the doctor's surgery and they had to resuscitate me. They had to clear the doctor's surgery. The doctors told me afterwards, resuscitate me, take me to hospital. That's when my journey first began. When I got to the hospital, they ran tests and they said, oh, you've got a lack of magnesium and lack of iron in your body. I never thought anything much after that. After a couple of days, they sent me home with magnesium tablets, with iron tablets, and told me go and see my doctor in a week's time. I went to see my doctor in a week's time, and he said, you've just got lack of iron and magnesium. Just take these tablets. You're going to be fine. I thought that was the end of that. You know, take the iron, the magnesium, I'm going to be fine. It comes to August 2019. I wake up, cannot move. When I say I can't move, I couldn't even get out of the bed. So I rang to my sister because I'd gone to my mum's because it was coming up to her birthday. And luckily my sister was off school because she's a teacher. So I ring down to my sister, I said, Mainie, come up, I cannot move. She comes up and she thinks I'm joking at this point. And she goes, Marva, just get up. And I'm like, I literally cannot move. I'm willing myself to move my legs. Nothing is happening. So she calls my mum up. My mum comes up and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, because I've walked up 2 flights of stairs the night before. I wasn't ill or anything. So I've woke up the morning unable to move from the waist down. So my mum's solution, and I have to say she is next nurse, so I do laugh at this. She says, they're going to get me down 2 flights of stairs, give me a bed bath, and then call the ambulance, because, you know, you've got to be really presentable for the ambulance drivers. When the ambulance came, the drivers were like, oh my gosh, because every time they tried to move me, although I was in, I couldn't move, every time they touched me, it was like I was in so much pain. To get me in the ambulance, they had to actually give me an injection to numb the body to get me into the ambulance. So when I get to the hospital, I'm having this debate with the doctors and nurses because they've run these tests and they're telling me your iron and your magnesium is practically non-existent in your body. And I remember they said, we don't even know how you're here. And I'm like, listen, I've been taking these supplements from the doctors. I've been taking the magnesium. I take them religiously. They said, well, you can't have been taking them right. I said, I can assure you I've been taking these right. Anyway, they send me for tests. They're sending me for all kinds of things, scans. I've never had so many things done in such a short period of time. I was baffling them because they could not work out why I had no movement in my body. After a couple of days, a professor came down and he said, this is where your problem is. You've got you're perimenopausal. Now in 2019, people weren't talking about perimenopause. So I thought this was some kind of disease and this is why I'm not walking. And, you know, he didn't even explain to me what the perimenopause was. The other thing he said, I had, which I already knew, I had a dairy and wheat intolerance, which is a trigger for my eczema. And he said, because of your dairy and wheat intolerance, you have low absorption. So I'm not absorbing enough of the nutrients from the actual supplements. So I'm like, that's great. So what are we going to do now? So he said, well, I don't know. So at this point, he's got me on morphine. They've got me on tramadol. They've got me on Buscopan. And in between that, I'm on ibuprofen and paracetamol. That is their solution. I'm out of pain, but I still can't walk. After a week, they send me home with this lovely concoction, but I can't still walk. And they've got me on repeat prescription. They said, oh, we'll just give you a repeat prescription. Doctor will give you a repeat prescription. For me, that wasn't a solution. But the biggest problem was I could not think. My brain felt like it had cotton wool in it. And it just wasn't a solution. So I decided to stop taking, and I do not tell people to stop taking tablets for the doctors. But for me, I needed to be able to think because I'm a very analytical person. So I started doing my research into how could I get magnesium to stabilize in my body. And that's when I hit on transdermal magnesium. Anyway, to cut the story short, I thought was really excited by this. And I sent my sister out to go and get me this magnesium sprays. None of them worked for me because every time they were hitting my body, they were burning me, they were itching me, and they were flaring up my skin because my skin is super sensitive because I've got eczema prone skin. So I thought, you know something, I'll make it myself. And that's what I did. I made my own magnesium spray. And I started spraying myself with it every day. And that was the end of August 2019. And I had myself walking by October 2019. So that's why I'm so passionate about advocating for women, and also about women understanding what is going on with their bodies and not being dismissed. Because for me, that was a very scary time. And I do believe if I wasn't the person I was, I'd probably be in a wheelchair today.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, isn't it? I mean, just the ingenuity of women never ceases to amaze me, because if there's a way, we'll find it.
Exactly.
You know, and thank goodness we are like that, you know, because it's so needed across our lives, isn't it? At various
Exactly.
stages, it's so needed. Um, yeah, I mean, a really awful situation where I can see, like so many of us being dismissed during perimenopause because of clinicians' lack of training. And even if it's not lack of training, it's just that lack of intuition or even conversation. You know, it's not enough for somebody to just tell you that you're perimenopausal when, like you say, in 2019, very few people were talking about perimenopause. It really didn't hit until 2021. So it's a conversation that they should have had with you so that you could understand your own biology. But the truth of it is, no one was going to have that conversation with you about that. And so it's quite remarkable that you found your own route. Well, unsurprisingly, knowing you as I do, unsurprisingly that you found your own route. And quite often that's what we've got to do. And certainly as champions, it's what we do, isn't it? We most of us will have experienced terrible situations with our health and well-being, and we don't want anybody else to suffer, and therefore we've got to learn and find a route that works for us, and then share the conversation with other people in the hope
Exactly.
that it encourages them as well. Yeah, quite an amazing story. My notes here have gone very dark. I need a light on now. It's got very dark, so I'm struggling to see. I may have to put my spectacles on in a minute. So having then been sort of misdiagnosed and dismissed, and coming back to the topic that is all about inclusion and being a Black woman, did you feel at the time really dismissed, or did you feel that this was just the way it was and nobody really knew what was wrong with you? And
To be quite honest, I felt nobody was listening to me because I'm explaining to them what my issues were. I'm telling them I'm taking what I was given a few months before, but they were telling me maybe I'm taking it wrong. I'm like, no, I'm taking it exactly right. But I think the worst thing for me was when I was in hospital, I felt like a guinea pig, because what was happening was 2-3 times a day, the doctors are coming around with student doctors, and they're not talking to me. They're not even asking me, is it okay? But they're having these conversations about me with the student doctors. And I'm like, I am here. But it's like, I was like an experiment to them. It's like, oh, when she's not walking, we don't understand. And I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, it really felt like I was really not heard, but also that I was a guinea pig for them, because they didn't really understand until the professor came down what was going on with me.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite incredible, but sadly, probably more common than any of us know. Now, you've launched a survey recently. Tell us about your
Yeah, I've
survey.
launched a survey on menopause and race. And the reason why I launched this survey was because what I found in the work that I was doing is when I was talking to especially ethnic minorities, they didn't really understand what was going on with their bodies. But not only that, there's a stigma that we don't talk about things, especially Black women. We're taught from childhood that you don't wash your dirty linen in public. We suffer in silence. But what was my turning point was last year I did a conference which I held with Berkshire NHS Trust, and we got Annabelle Saruma to come down and give us a talk on It's a book called book called Divided that she's done. She's a doctor. And what was interesting about that talk, it was really interesting to see how so many women had no idea, especially the Black and Asian women, of what was going through their body. And these women, everybody in that room were health professionals. And you would think health professionals would understand what was going on with their bodies. And I had the most interesting conversations with these women afterwards about, you know, menopause, what was going on in their bodies, anxiety. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I kept saying, you know, you've got to tell the next generation. And one of the questions I always ask is, is your mother still alive? Can she tell you about menopause and what she went through? And the reason, what was startling me about, and most people, even when their parents were alive or their mothers were alive, the mothers wouldn't talk to them about it. And I remember part of the reason why my brand is called Shush, because when I was in hospital, I learned more about my family medical history than at any time. And that was because my mum was alive. So I was hearing about, you know, this person had in the family, you know, this sickness. I even found out my grandfather, who I thought died of lung cancer, died of prostate cancer. But because the doctors were asking such specific questions, I'm going, no, we don't have that in our family. Oh, no. And my mum was able to say, oh, no, this person had this and that person had that. And I was like, this is ridiculous. So that's part of the reason why I named my company Shush, because for me, we've got to break this taboo. And by breaking that taboo, the next generation shouldn't have to go through what we've actually gone through. And I'm really passionate about that because I feel we're the first generation breaking this taboo. And it should be easier for the next generation actually coming through. So that's part of the reason I started this survey. And then when I was speaking to people, because even when I was ill, I was just telling everybody what was wrong. I didn't care. They came and see me in hospital. They came and see me at home. I'm telling you. So I started hearing other people's stories. And one of them's my best friend who's Black. And she started telling me her issues. And I'm like, how did I not know about that? And she was like, oh, I didn't want to say. So I was like, this is ridiculous. So it's really interesting because the data that's starting to come in from this survey is becoming so interesting that, you know, I've got all women actually filling it in, because what I'm trying to get from it is what is the comparative data from what, you know, an Asian woman goes through to a Caucasian woman comes through to a Caribbean woman goes through to an African woman goes through, so we can understand it, because lifestyle food has a great part to play in this. And I'm sure, as you know, in places like Japan, there's no such word as menopause, and they think it's because the amount of soya they have in their actual diet. But in the West, we say, oh no, soy is not too good because it could lead to cancer. So I think there's so many disparities. I think we need to understand what is going on and where we're having the problems. And it was funny, you were talking about Southeast Asian women, because I did a couple of talks in Bristol. And, you know, a lot of them are talking about heart palpitations, high blood pressure, hair thinning. That's their big thing. And those are the symptoms they get. And I'm trying to analyze, is some of the symptoms because they eat a lot of spicy food? And I think there's so much more work and drilling down that needs to actually be done, so the different ethnicities are understood and we can get better outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much research needed for sure. And even though our mothers didn't talk to us about menopause, that's mostly because they didn't really know they were going through it a lot of the time. They wouldn't have connected some of the symptoms to menopause. You know, they would have been told that it was an aging process. So if they'd had aching joints, for example, then that would have been put down to age. But our menopause is not our mother's menopause. We have so many varying factors. Our lifestyles are so different. They're incomparable to our mothers and our grandmothers. And so we've got to look at, you know, what is driving these severe symptom episodes for a lot of women. And we're looking at a majority of women now. I mean, I've been involved in menopause now for upwards of 10 years studying it. And the thing that really surprises me is just how severe some of these symptoms are for so many women. And when I first started this, you know, people were talking about there were lots of dismissive conversations that were very much what our parents, our mothers would have heard, and really, you know, it's just women go through it, and you've just got to push through it. You've just got to put up with it. Well, a lot of the symptoms that we experience now, and especially, I think, I mean, across the board for women, but, you know, keeping the conversation in the line of inclusion, is our lifestyle that's having such a dramatic impact on our health. And of course, I'm going to lean into the mental health side of things, because that is the one thing that I found so prevalent over the last 10 years, looking at women who are experiencing mental health crisis in some situations, relating to their hormones, but also relating to their diet, lifestyle, stress factors, the lack of community engagement, the lack of healthcare knowledge. I mean, it is vast, the reasons why we experience it so badly and why so many women do. But the conversation about Black women, brown women, those women of colour, that I find so alarming is this dismissive culture within healthcare and also in the workplace, because that itself is going to induce much more stress and mental health symptoms, because it's just not being recognised early enough, diagnosed, and treatments being made available. I remember those stats that we were looking at earlier, you know, 23% versus 5%, and it's crazy.
I think we've also got understanding a lot of, and this is conversations I'm having with Black women, and also it's coming up in the stats. A lot of women, they're fearful to get involved with studies. That's another thing. A lot of Black women, they say they won't get involved with studies. They don't want to get involved with, you know, anything medical. And a lot of it, I think, to understand a lot of it is because they feel that if they advocate for themselves, they're told they're angry, they're told they've got a chip on their shoulder. So the work also has to be done with the doctors, with the nurses. You know, there has to be training on how you speak to them. You know, we have a way sometimes of being more animated. We may raise our voice. That doesn't mean we're angry. It's just the way we are. And I know when I've been doing stuff with corporate, I've been really explaining that to HR, because you know, you can't just say, oh, they're angry or they've got a chip on their shoulder. You've got to understand their culture as well. And culture does play quite a big part in this whole story as well, with Black and brown women. And then you've got, you know, they think we've got this higher pain threshold. We should be able to bear pain more. You know, there's a lot of dismantling that actually needs to be done. You know, we are human. We do bear pain just like any other woman. So we shouldn't be treated differently, but we are treated differently, and not just in menopause, in when we're having childbirth and things like that. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done within the institutions to demystify this, so we do get a fair voice and we are actually heard.
Well, I hope that this gets seen and listened to on YouTube over and over and over, because, you know, if this gets in front of the right people, research, I think just understanding and then offering and then applying the knowledge that comes from understanding has got to be the way forward. Marva, thank you so much. It's really interesting listening to you and the experiences that you've had. I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to, although not necessarily your near-death experience, but I'm glad you're fighting fit and back at it now. Thank you very much to you, and I'll come back to you for a last word.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Really interesting conversation. Now I'm really going to go straight to a different diversity now. My good friend Margot, who's who's there waiting in the wings, our third guest speaker. Margot, lovely to see you. I know you're a busy person, and you probably forgot that it was a Sunday night. Yeah,
I did a bit, Dee, but the conversation has been really fantastic, and I'm so glad that I've been here for all of it. So worth every moment.
Terrific. Well, let's you and I have a good old natter now, because I want to pick your brains on quite a few things with your very valuable experience and the way that you work. I just explained that Margot is you're the global head of social sustainability. I mean, you've got such a long title. Who came up with this title? I haven't even finished yet. You're the global head of social sustainability and inclusion at ISS. Correct?
Yep, that's correct, Dee.
Right. In layman's
And I agree.
terms.
It's too long. Look, I guess just to give sort of some context and background, when I joined ISS just around 5 years ago, and I came from an organization called Sodexo, a French organization, and ISS is a Danish company. I joined really as a DEI lead, and the work has evolved over the last number of years to also think about how we measure the S part of ESG and the social part of sustainability. So that's really why it's the job title has changed, but it's still very much in the inclusion space, and really thinking about, how we interact in the community and how we think about the people who work for us, our workforce. And very quickly, to give context for anyone on the call who has never heard of ISS, which is, I'm sure, loads of you, it's not ISIS and it's not the International Space Station. It's a Danish company who provides facilities management services. Fairly big company. We employed 325,000 people globally in the world, and we've just celebrated 125 years in business. So been around for a long time. And actually, interesting enough, and won't dwell on it, Dee, but we were one of the first companies to have a HR manager back in the 1930s.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
it's interesting,
incredible.
isn't it? So,
Yeah.
in fairness to the Danes, they were ahead on understanding some of those things.
Well, so few companies that make it to 100 years, let alone 100. And did you say 125?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
This year it's 125.
quite incredible. So give us a little bit of what's your typical day like as head of, I've even forgotten what you are now. Social
Don't worry.
sustainability and inclusion. What is it that you
Um,
do, and
what is it
how
I
does that
do?
impact?
Yeah, so I mean, really, I've sort of two hats at the moment. I'm doing the DEI part, and primarily, I think, because of some of the challenges in the world, really focused on inclusion. We've worked for a number of years on trying to look at our diversity and lots of those things. So now we're really looking at the inclusion part, and then the other part is the social sustainability. So if you ask me about a typical day, we have a number of projects that we're running where we're measuring sustainability and the social part, and particularly social value in many of the countries around the world. And that measuring will be on the back of the work that we do on inclusion. So the employment of people from so many different backgrounds, all the dimensions of diversity, and I suppose all the challenges we have as a company. And we're an organization and an industry in facilities management where turnover can be quite a challenge. 60% of our workforce are female. And so we're really trying to think about the demographics and who comes into our organization and how we keep people working. And we have a lot of an older population.
Yeah, wow. I mean, keeping that talent across the menopause age group. I say age group for want of a better word, because of course I'm always saying let's not talk about age. We know it's hormone related, and it can happen at any age. But where do you see the biggest challenges are across the workplace? I mean, there aren't many companies that employ over 300,000 staff, so that in itself is a huge juggling act, isn't it, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and just making sure that everybody feels part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenges, Dee, certainly for me, that I experience for our people and in the business are those around the different cultural understandings of things. And it's not to say any one culture is better than the other, but it's more that, what's spoken about, what's acceptable to talk about, and what kind of focus there is, where resources are put, how money is spent, and how aids and support for people is evenly distributed. So that's a big challenge. It's the fact that also workforces really vary in their sense of comfort about being able to speak about these things. So I give you an example, and France well, as I do. When I worked in Sodexo and I've only gone 5 years from there, but when I did, nobody in the French business wanted to talk about menopause. And I had a number of people leading D&I who were on my team and said to me, please don't ask me to speak about this. I'm never going to speak about this. And that's a European country. So then when you go out into, we work in areas, particularly in Asia, many, many different parts of Asia, and you go to the Middle East and you go into South America, whatever, and all those are very different. So that's probably the biggest challenge. And then being in an industry, and I was struck by this when your previous speakers were speaking, we're in an industry where it's very low margin. So having enough I suppose resources to support the work you do and not just talking about it. And I think it was Beverley spoke around that in the beginning. We can talk a good talk, but can we make sure that we're really helping people? So are we making sure there's support, there's aids, there's the right kind of I suppose learning for people. We would do learning around things like menopause, but trying to make sure that's in every country and that it's in different languages, and understanding the cultural context again around what's comfortable. And maybe the one that is, I know certainly when you talked at the beginning about LGBTQI, I certainly have, and as a proud member of that community, I've experienced that even talking about being a member of the LGBTQI community in itself can be incredibly difficult. Just having a pride celebration in many countries is just not possible, because obviously so many countries where that's illegal. So you can't even just talk about that dimension. So then if you go further around, for instance, LGBTQI health or healthcare, that's a really big issue. So it really depends on the cultural context. Sorry, I've gone on a long time on that one, Dee.
No. I mean, I really want to touch on the LGBTQI or the LGBTQ plus, as I said. So I'm being corrected already. It's I.
No,
is it? Is but what is the right terminology?
I mean, on a level, and I suppose with the people I work with and various groups, we tend to say LGBTQI. But for me, there's no right or no wrong. Whatever somebody's comfortable saying. People say sometimes just LGBT, and I'm fine with that as well. But obviously, if we say plus, it is more inclusive of everybody.
Yeah. Well, of course, I know you well. I know your wife. So both of you form part of the LG. You see, I can't even say it now.
Don't worry.
Yeah, but as far as I'm concerned, you're part of my community. Whatever. But I know that in the workplace and across healthcare in particular, this can be really problematic, right? Because what I've witnessed, and certainly as a behaviourist now for 30 odd years, is that where gender plays a role, quite often there are mental health concerns, and that's impacted by the lack of knowledge, the support, the education within healthcare, and of course that also impacts in the workplace. As far as I'm concerned, life is life. You get, whether you're at home or at work, you're still going to be experiencing symptoms, and so for those that aren't cisgender or heterosexual, there's another layer there, isn't there? There's another layer of challenge.
Yeah, many layers. And I mean, we couldn't possibly on this call probably even get into it all, but you have the very fact that obviously as communities, particularly, we've got people come from all sorts of backgrounds, we've all sorts of class, we got people from race, ethnicities, etc. People then bring often some of the very challenging circumstances that around their coming out, etc. So, for instance, a lot of people being alienated from family, being alienated from, in communities from a very early age. People who definitely suffer wealth inequality. Um, and then I suppose, the truth is, and I've certainly experienced this myself, where healthcare is not acutely aware to actually know how to deal with, particularly in my experience, and it's just my own lived experience, but as a lesbian woman, there's less conversations than there might be for my heterosexual sister. That's been my experience. Just that it's very different. So, and a little bit of a lack of understanding, and particularly if you don't have children, etc., or people who've had children and come at it from a different perspective. So, I think it's very different if you're trans man. You think about maybe having had hormone treatment in your body at certain stages, or trans woman, and the challenges to even speak beyond that, and what has been happening for somebody in the body. So I think it's very, very big, it's very diverse, and it's very complex.
Do you think that there's an element of do we expect too much from our healthcare providers? Do we expect too much from our employers? Do we expect everybody to know everything about everyone?
I think the truth is they can't know everything, and I probably, when we say the word expect, I suppose we all expect to get a level of care and an understanding. But I know myself that, when I speak to my doctor, and I'm very lucky, I've found a practice where we live, and a great doctor. She doesn't know everything about my life, and my part is to help her to understand where I come, when I come to her, where my challenges are. But then I expect her to treat me just like everybody else in relation to making sure that I have the best access to healthcare. So I think they can't understand all our circumstances, and they can't understand our lived experience or history, but they certainly can make sure that when we get to them, that they give us the very best care. And that they are, informing themselves as best they can. I think that's incredibly important. To not understand, for instance, the LGBT community at all, and to have and this has been sort of the past history. So like the other two speakers, a whole group of people that have not had a real understanding of their health. So I think it's important that they're informed, but they can know everything, and I understand that.
But I think that's why representation is so important, isn't it? It's just, we're all learning. We're all on this planet together, and we're all learning, hopefully, from one another. And I think that by having open conversations, I mean, if you've got a heterosexual GP, they're not necessarily going to understand a lesbian woman as a lived experience any more than I do. As a heterosexual woman, and you can say that if your GP is white and you are black, your white GP is not necessarily going to. Well, they're not going to know. They're not going to have that level of understanding. But I think by advocating for ourselves, talking more, being more open and less fearful, actually, of judgment, because I think we hold in so much. As women, we don't talk about it because we're fearful of judgment, or that it might be wrong, or what are they going to think of me? That's really where it comes from. What are they going to think of me? Then I think that the world will be a better place, and certainly women will suffer less. Now, I'm just going to talk about married life as two women who are going through menopause. I'm just going to touch on that. Yes, because it must be quite a tricky situation at times.
Yeah, it is most definitely. And I can only speak. Sarah, my wife, is in the other. I'm in the car, and Sarah, we pulled in, but Sarah's in the other seat, so she's laughing. But you know, there's
Sorry, Sarah.
there's 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 a year between us, so we've both experienced this very much at the same time. I think Sarah first to me second. Hers was a little earlier than mine, but yeah, very challenging. And again, I'm only speaking for us, but and I obviously know some friends in the same scenario. But you know, two of you having hot flushes at night in the one bedroom is definitely a challenge. And the Ostrogel, they try to, whose Ostrogel is it anyway? It's or Eastergel or whatever it's called. Who's on the progesterone tablets? Did you take my tablets, etc.? And the only side, I suppose, that the other side of that is, and the reverse of that is, there's a huge amount of understanding. And we both, really, really, I think there's a lot of care around the fact that we both know exactly how it feels. And the other thing that's been very helpful has been that we sometimes have very different circumstances, very different things and symptoms that we have. And, there's a bit of learning and about what works well, etc., like that sort of thing. So there's been, if you want to have research, we're certainly a bunch of people that can kind of double up the research very quickly. But it's been a positive experience, Dee, in the main, and having a partner. And I consider I'm very lucky versus some of my heterosexual friends, who have, and again, it's not that their partners, don't try to understand, because we all know there are many, many great men who do try to understand. But it's a little easier in the discussion, I would say.
Well, again, it goes back to that lived experience, doesn't it? I mean, we can't expect men to totally understand what it is that we're experiencing, because one, they're never going to experience it themselves. And even with andropause, we know that they get symptoms, but you can't really compare the impact of the two. It's very different. But yeah, yes, it must be quite interesting in your household. But I know you've both got a terrific sense of humour, so that's that's the main thing, isn't it? And
Exactly.
humor has to be one of the best symptom managers I know when you're going through menopause.
Most definitely, and alcohol has been, it's been interesting. We've both found one commonality is that alcohol kills us both. So red wine's a killer, but we haven't quite given it up yet. But we keep persevering, trying to find the right ones.
I thought you were going to say that alcohol was another symptom manager, and I was about to cut you off. Oh, it's really terrific. I know you have such a busy schedule, and it's really great to see you, Margot, and just to have your take on the LGBTQI experience, because we know that it's not just lesbian women. Of course, we know that there's non-binary. We know that there's trans men and trans women, because if they've transitioned from male to female, they're still going to experience symptoms, and that's for another round table. I think we're certainly going to have a round table talking about the transition for male to female, female to male, because no one talks about it. It's absolutely a taboo subject still, and so therefore, when topics are taboo, it means that someone's suffering, as far as I'm concerned. And things are just swept under the carpet and totally ignored. So it's been a really, really interesting round table this evening. Now I'm going to come back to Beverley for some last words about menopause, this round table. What else would you like to add as your last words this evening, Beverley?
I guess well, it's a big question, but I guess I'd invite everybody who's leaning into this to have an awareness of how traumatic this can be for some women, and within our practice as menopause champions, roundtable champions, having a trauma-informed approach, being aware of that, You talked about brain changes, and we know that there's certain brain changes with a lack of estrogen. So we know that has a big impact. So how we do things overlaid with some of the traumatic experiences, certainly with women I've spoken to from the global majority, may have experienced. I'd invite people listening in to get hold of a trauma-informed approach. What does it mean? How can I support somebody but have that awareness of that? And the other one is the work by the current health secretary, Wes Streeting, certainly in the NHSE. We're aware of NHS England. We're aware of the 10-year health plan. One of those pillars within the 10-year health plan talks about moving from provider to community. So it is important within healthcare providers, we want to move a lot of our work from provider into community. Our providers need to be aware. So two things there, trauma-informed approach, and if providers are going into the community, having awareness of that. I'd invite people to have a look at the 10-year health plan by Wes Streeting.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Beverley. Thank you for your time this
Okay.
evening. Marva, where have you gone now? There you are. Last words from you this evening. How have you found this round
Listen,
table?
I tell everybody the same thing. Menopause is a journey. It's not a destination. And it's really important that we understand what's going in our bodies. We advocate for ourselves. We learn to advocate for ourselves. But the most important, there's no wrong or right in menopause. We have to do what's best for ourselves. We have to, and this is what I tell my clients, I said, we present the facts, but you have to make an informed decision with the facts that are presented to you. So I want women to continue to advocate, but also don't be sucked into what I call the meno washing going on. Every product's now a menopause product, and don't be sucked into it. Work out what is best for you, because there's so much on TikTok, on YouTube, and women tell me they're getting confused. But the best thing is, and I say, sit down and think about what's going on with you, what you're feeling, and then work out what is best for you.
And it starts with education, doesn't it?
Education.
Get the right education. If you know what's happening to your biology, to your physiology, to your psychology, even if it's at a low level, if you have that level of education, it changes everything. Thanks so much, Marva. It's been really lovely to have you this evening. And Margot, over to you, and then I'll let you go. I know Sarah's eagerly waiting. Get off there, Margot. Get off. Come on, hurry up, Dee.
No, Dee, thank you. And as I said before, it's been a very inspirational session, and listening to the other speakers has been fantastic. I think for me, you brought it up, and I would sort of go back to the same. Not everybody can know everything. We can't understand everything about everybody in every community, and certainly in mine, you can't. But it's about asking the right questions. We have to challenge. We have to continue to inform, and really just make sure that we're building that representation, so that as a community we're not invisible, we're seen, and that we again, just like the others, we represent the such a wide spectrum of different women, and it's just making sure that those voices are heard, and that it's not a sort of how would you say, it's not something that's invisible, and it's a group that feels that their voices are included.
It's really interesting listening to the astronauts as they were talking last night. I was listening to them, and I think it was Jeremy that was saying, if you they were looking back at us and we're looking at the astronauts, and they're saying, that basically we're all the same. We're all human. We're all the same. We're all impacted by the same things, and I think that whatever challenge you're going through, whether it be menopause or any other challenge through your life, I think you've just got to throw yourself into it with an open heart, an open mind, and an open door, and not so much of an open wallet. That would be, no open wallets, just an open mind and an open heart, definitely, and really look after each other. We've all got to look after each other and be there for one another. So it's been another really insightful Menopause Pro roundtable. I'm hoping that people will be listening to this as it's recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube. And if you really like what we're talking about, then please subscribe. Fantastic. Thanks so much to my guest speakers. The next, I don't have a date in front of me for the next roundtable, but I know that we're talking about early menopause, which will be a really fantastic topic for us to discuss. Can't wait for that one. And so we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much again to my guests, Beverley, Marva and Margot. And we look forward to seeing you at the next roundtable. Bye for now.